A huge trade just went down, and the NHL should be terrified of the future of the Minnesota Wild as they land David Jiricek for a first, a second, a fourth round pick, and Damon Hunt. There's some mixed opinions about this trade, but we got to break it all down coming up on this episode of Hat Trick HQ, so stick around. But before we get into it, just want to remind you guys to hit that subscribe button. 88% of you guys watching haven't hit that button. It's completely free, and we got content covering the entire NHL every single day. Mark, this is, well, it came out, I don't want to say out of nowhere. The Jiricek sweepstakes have been going on for days, if not weeks, and Minnesota was named as a front runner in the past, but the deal finally went down today. And honestly, my first reaction, not just because I'm also a Minnesota Wild fan, but my first reaction was this is a great deal for them for multiple reasons. We see David Jiricek in a fifth, and they give up Damon Hunt a first, a second, and a fourth. Probably going to be a late first, giving up probably like a late second a couple years down the road. Mark, this to me is just one of these things where it's almost like drafting David Jiricek without having to draft him in terms of what they gave up. I think this is a great deal.
Yeah, I mean, looking at this, it seemed like half the leagues in the NHL were in on David Jiricek. The Minnesota Wild coming out and winning this sweepstake, like you said, is like drafting him at the sixth overall pick that he was picked at by the Columbus Blue Jackets. This is one of the prospects around the leagues that everyone wanted a piece of. He was a guy that couldn't find his footing in Columbus. He got sent down to the Cleveland Monsters of the AHL. It seemed like a senior change was going to happen sooner rather than later, which meant that the Minnesota Wild jumped on him and grabbed this guy. Looking at the draft capital going on, a lot of fans might look at this and say, hey, listen, a first, a second, and a fourth does seem like a lot, but this is going to be late picks. This is a 2025 first round pick that the Wild are going to be competing in the midst of wanting to win a Stanley Cup during this time. The 2027 second, once again, they're still going to be in their just competing era. But looking at this, Josh, do you think they came out and kind of robbed a guy like Jiricek from Columbus?
I mean, it's hard to say Rob because I don't know what the other offers around the league were. I mean, we heard Nashville in the rumors, we heard even Montreal in the rumors. There was a lot of teams surrounding him, but like the thing is, I think people were thinking that Jiricek would fetch a much lower package simply because they look at the stats and they look at the fact that he was drafted 2 years ago at sixth overall and he's not a full-time NHLer yet. Like the guy just turned 21 2 days before recording this video. He's a 6'4" right shot defenseman. Right shot defenseman, they cost a lot more because they're a lot harder to come by in the NHL. You don't just get a guy like this, let alone a guy like this with the draft pedigree that he had, with the offensive capability. He has potential to be an offensive star still in the NHL if things come together. Just look at his draft plus 1 year. Putting up, what was that, 38 points in 55 games with the Cleveland Monsters. He already has 2 goals, 3 points in 4 games this year. Yeah, he hasn't really been able to crack the NHL, but Mark, the thing is, guys who are 6'4", bigger guys, and especially defensemen, it often takes them a little longer to get to the NHL. It's something we've seen over time in the past, but when we're looking at the future of the Minnesota Wild now, I think the biggest thing for them is how this impacts the future with their young core of defensemen, because David Jiricek, right now, to me, is a staple for their future top four on defense. Because Jared Spurgeon, he's still good and he's still going to get a lot of minutes, but we're talking a few years further down the line because Spurgeon's not getting any younger. You're looking at Faber and Jiricek down the right side if all things pan out. Faber is locked up long term, and even Jiricek, his contract's not up till next year, and he's a restricted free agent. They'll be able to sign him when those Parise and Suter contracts are completely gone, really, basically. So for me, having that there on the right side is amazing, but it's not just the right side. Their left side is really good too.
Yeah, no, I mean, looking at this, and like you said, when we're looking at this contract, this was a team that was struggling to keep cap situations under par. I mean, Parise, Suter kind of screwed him over a little bit with those buyouts. But looking at Jiricek coming in, they get him this year at 918,000, but they also get him next year at 918,000. This is a defenseman that could explode and go on a tear with Minnesota. I'm not going to say he's going to come in and just set records for this Minnesota team. But looking at the right side, Jiricek could slide in, play a bit of the left, but he's going to stay on the right side. Maybe he slides in for Bogosian. Maybe he spends some time with Iowa in the AHL. But looking at the future with Jiricek in this, I don't think it's a bold statement to say, Josh, and correct me if I'm wrong, but Faber and Jiricek on the right side might be the best defensive prospect, and I don't want to put a guy like Faber under prospects, but when we're looking at the future, this has to be potential to be the best right-handed defenseman core in the NHL.
Yeah, I don't think it's crazy to say that because of, I mean, Faber's sort of coming out of nowhere and being a runner-up in Calder to Connor Bedard is amazing in and of itself. But again, like Jiricek still is a highly touted prospect. Yes, he's had his problems in Columbus, But when you look at the way Minnesota can develop their young players, like they have with Marco Rossi, like they have with Matt Boldy, even like they have with Faber, there's precedent for a guy like Jiricek to come in and be able to accelerate his development very fast in Minnesota. But also, you got to look at who some of his partners may be. And when you look at the future of Minnesota, right now they have Jonas Brodin, who's hurt, but they also have a bunch of draft picks. They also have Zeev Buium. Zeev Buium is playing amazing for the University of Denver. Minnesota traded up in the 2024 draft just specifically to pick him. And a lot of fans were saying, well, he's going to be that future lefty next to Brock Faber, and he still very well might be. But Brodin's still got a good amount of time with the team. There's still some draft capital. Yes, they lose one first round pick, but again, you're basically picking Jiricek with that pick. You have so much going down for Minnesota for the future. If you look at a top four of Buium, Faber, Brodin, and Jiricek in a couple of years, that to me is a decor that looks ready to compete. I mean, I don't know, maybe it's a stretch to say within the next 2 or 3 years, but definitely as we look further towards the future. And that's why I think the NHL should be kind of scared, because it's not just them. Their forwards are doing great. Rossi's improving every year. Boldy's improving every year. Kaprizov is one of, if not the front runner for the Hart Trophy so far this season, though Marty Necas is making a good case for himself. I think right now Minnesota has done, under Bill Guerin, has done pretty much everything right. There's a couple of weird contracts. You know, the Yakov Trenin is actually not looking too terrible. The Marcus Foligno deal, meh. But in terms of getting young talent and putting them in a position to thrive, I think that's where Minnesota's really doing a lot of things right.
And I mean, looking at the future, and I do kind of want to look at the draft capital. Looking at this is without the first round pick that they're moving in this, the second or the fourth being moved out. But looking at their draft capital in 2026 alone, they have 2/3, 2/4, 2/5, and 2/6. They still have room to make moves. If they want to compete, their window does open up even more. They get younger with a guy like Jiricek joining this blue line. They get more draft capital. Yes, they move out 3 draft picks, but they still have multiple picks that they can go out, acquire players during just in the middle of the season, going into the playoff hunt. Whatever it might be, they open up cap space. This is a team that's going to be competing for quite some time. It's not going to be just this season. It's going to be for the next couple of seasons. Kaprizov will still be here. You have Faber here. You have Jiricek joining this team. You have the young pieces coming up. And when a guy like Fleury retires, you still have Jesper Wallstedt, a guy that, yes, he might be struggling a bit in the AHL this year, but this could be the goaltender of the future. Looking at this Wild team, Josh, do you think there's a chance they win a cup in the next 2 to 3 years?
2 to 3 might be stretching it. I mean, but I don't know, right? Like, because it all depends on a lot of the development of these players, and the curves of development vary all across the league. If Jiricek ends up being a bona fide, 30, 40 point defenseman next year, then maybe within 2, 3 years it's possible. I think there's still a lot yet to be seen. I think there's going to be some moves that are yet to be seen. There's going to have to be a big Kaprizov extension. There's going to be so many things going down. What I will say is I think the Wild have put themselves in the right position. Before we finish this video off, I do want to mention this from the Columbus side. What do you think about the return for Columbus? Because I know there was lots of talks. Like when Minnesota was mentioned this, fans were saying, please don't move Rossi. Please don't move Rossi, because some people thought that may be what it would take to get someone like a Jiricek. At the end of the day, Damon Hunt, former third round pick, I think, and he's doing fine in the AHL. He got 4 points as a defenseman in 9 games. 22 years old. He's older than Jiricek. So like that plus a first, a second, and a fourth is really not bad at the end of the day for Minnesota, but also for Columbus. You get a first and you get a couple fresh cracks at draft picks for a guy that just didn't really seem to be working in your organization. I actually don't mind it from their side either.
Yeah, I mean, looking at it, the biggest thing was it seemed like it was going to split between Jiricek and the Columbus Blue Jackets. It was just a matter of when it was going to happen. A domino was about to fall, and the return they got is a lot better, like you said earlier on in this video, than what people are expecting. I mean, I'd seen rumors floating around the Oilers were giving up maybe a second and a B prospect. We've seen the Canucks falling out of the race after not wanting to give up top-end talent or high draft capital. So I do think Columbus did get a good haul for a guy that seemed like he was going to be moved. He couldn't make this roster. They still want to get younger, and they still have some middling talent, so it does make sense from both ends. I just think Minnesota is taking a kind of low risk with a super high reward on a guy like this.
Yep, absolutely. I think the draft capital they gave up makes sense for the return they're getting. They have him ready, primed, in a position where he can thrive over the next few years, whether it's in Iowa, whether it's with the actual Wild, slot in for Bogosian, maybe play some second power play minutes. There's a lot of things he could do, and I'm very excited to see. But I want to hear all your guys' thoughts down below in the comment section. What do you think about this trade? Do you think Minnesota won? Do you think Columbus won? I know a lot of fans are split on it, so we'd love to hear from you, but that'll do it for this episode of Hat Trick HQ. If you enjoyed, leave a like, comment, subscribe to the channel. It's completely free to subscribe, and we have NHL content every single day. I'm your host, Josh Gosse, alongside my co-host, Mark Pye. We'll catch you in the next one.